Throughout ages, the question, who am I, has been asked by philosophers, kings, prophets, and most of all, by mopey adolescents who are having existential crisis. Hindi tayo interesado sa sinasabi ng philosophers at ng theologians dito sa lesson na to. Hindi natin pag-uusapan ang definition ng soul or ng consciousness. We are more concerned with that introspective teenager. In other words, we will explore how people understand themselves. No, hindi dun sa lesson ng understanding the self na meron kayo, pero ito pa rin ay lesson sa social psychology. We will try to understand what they think or what people think are their strengths and weaknesses, what people and social groups are important to them, and what stories they tell about themselves. Now, because of modern technology, this question of identity is brought to a sharper focus in recent years by providing the opportunity to form social bonds with more people than your grandparents met in their entire lives. Social media is marvelous, but it creates a special form of anxiety, self-presentation panic. Okay, so generations ago, people met mostly face-to-face. Gamit ang pagtingin lang, ang unang tingin sa ibang tao, nalalaman natin yung kanilang edad, yung kanilang sex, and probably pati income at background nila. Ang problema, social media provides none of that. Okay? Twitter, Facebook, and blogs present you with a blank page when you sign up, leaving you to define yourself for the world. This could be both good and bad for other people. I can relate to this because sometimes I have personal struggles with social media when I sign up to them. So, in this lesson, we will explore how people define their sense of self, who they think they are, and how they choose to present themselves to the world. We will reveal that social forces affect their inward-looking personal thoughts, which are a reflection not only of who they are, but also how we connect or they connect to the social world. In addition, pag-uusapan natin kung paano yung self-concept natin ay nade-determine ang ating self-esteem, yung extent kung saan paano tayo pwedeng mag-succeed sa buhay natin at kung paano tayo nagre-respond sa challenges na kakaharapin natin. Medyo mahaba-habang usapan ito, kaya nga this video is separated into two parts. In part 1, this lesson pala is separated into two parts. This is the first part, which we are going to talk about spotlights and illusions, self-concept and self-esteem. And for the next video of this lesson, we will talk about perceived self-control, self-presentation, and self-serving bias. Alright, so, at the center of our worlds, more pivotal for us than anything else, is ourselves. Okay? As we navigate our daily lives, our sense of self continually engaged to the world. Alright, I want you to consider this example. One morning, nagising ka na late ka na para sa online class mo at nagulat ka or nagising kang gulo-gulo ang iyong buhok. Okay? So your hair is sticking up at weird angles on your head. Masyadong nang late para maligo ka at ang problema, required ng teacher mo na naka-turn on ang iyong camera. So, as best as you can, you try to smooth down the random spikes of your hair and entered your virtual classroom. So all morning, you're acutely self-conscious about your very bad hair day. A problema, to your surprise, your friends in your class don't say anything. Are they secretly laughing to themselves about how ridiculous you look? Or are they too preoccupied with themselves to notice your spiky hair? Now, from our self-focused perspective, we tend to overestimate our conspicuousness. Okay? Ang tawag dito ay spotlight effect. This means that we tend to see ourselves at center stage. So we intuitively overestimate the extent to which other people's attention is aimed at us. Noong 2000, nag-explore si Gilovich, Medvec, and si Savinsky tungkol sa spotlight effect by having students from Cornell University to wear an embarrassing Barry Manilow t-shirt before entering a room with other students. Para sa inyo na hindi kilala kung sino si Barry Manilow, siya ay isang sikat na American singer-songwriter na kilala sa kanyang mga cheesy love songs. So, the self-conscious t-shirt wearers guessed that nearly half their peers would notice the shirt. In actuality, only 23% did. So, what's true of our dorky clothes and bad hair day is also true with our emotions. Our anxieties, irritation, disgust, deceit, or attraction. Fewer people notice that fewer people actually notice than we presume. Keenly aware of our own emotions, we often suffer an illusion of transparency. Okay? If we're happy and we know it, we think that other people know it by the look of our face. And other people, we presume, will notice this, pero actually, we can be more opaque than we realize. Pag sinabi nating illusion of transparency, ito yung tendency natin na i-overestimate kung paano nakikita ng ibang tao or alam ng ibang tao yung personal mental state na meron tayo. Yung ibang manifestations ng illusion of transparency ay yung tendency natin na i-overestimate kung gaano naiintindihan ng ibang tao yung personal mental states natin. So, we also tend to overestimate the visibility of our social blunders and public mental slips. When we trigger the library alarm or accidentally insult someone, we may be mortified. We may think that everyone thinks that I am a jerk or you are a jerk. But research shows that we agonize over what we agonize over, other people may hardly notice and soon forget. Now, the spotlight effect and the related illusion of transparency are but two of many examples of the interplay between our sense of self and our social world. Here are also some of the examples. Social surroundings tend to affect our social awareness when we are the only members of our race, gender, or political group in a given group. We tend to notice how we differ and how others are reacting to our difference. Number 2, self-interest color our social judgment. When problems arise in a close relationship, such as a marriage, we usually attribute more responsibilities to our partner than to ourselves. When things go well at home or at work, we see ourselves as more responsible for that success. Number 3 is that self-concern motivates our social behavior. In hopes of making a positive impression, we agonize over our appearance. Like savvy politicians, we also monitor our other people's behaviors and expectations, and we adjust our behaviors accordingly. Probably you have experienced this the first time that you have entered, let's say, Starbucks. Before you head on over to the counter, you probably were trying to find out how other people are behaving in the said cafe. So, also, social relationships help define ourselves. In our varied relationships, we have varying selves. Note what Susan Anderson and Serena Chen in 2002 found out that we may be one self with our mother, another with friends, another with teenager. Now, how we think of ourselves is linked to that to the person we are with at the moment. Now, these examples suggest that the traffic between ourselves and others run both ways. Yung ideas, yung feelings natin tungkol sa sarili natin ay affected kung paano nagre-respond ang ibang tao sa atin. And others help us shape our sense of self too. So yung question is, how and how accurately do we know ourselves? What determine our self-concept? You may have many ways to complete the sentence, I am blank. Okay? I want you to think about 5 answers that you might give to this. Alright? Taken together, your answers define your self-concept. Okay? The concept of the self is what I personally call a knotty issue. You don't know how to unpick it, where to start, and even if you should try to unravel it, you probably don't know where to start and what you will find out. People spend many hours in church or in therapy or minsan sa Sagada trying to understand who they are and their place in the world. Parang soul searching and things like that. Pero for social psychologists, you don't find your true self. You discover it after it has rolled under a therapy or discover it after it has rolled under a therapist's couch. The self is something that is constructed. It's the central character that you make up in the story of your life. Meaning, sa perspective ng social psychologists, hindi hinahanap ang sarili. Okay? Ito ay binubuo natin. Yung idea natin kung sino tayo ay hindi hinahanap, bagkos ito ay binubuo natin at ito yung mga bahagi ng istorya na sinasabi natin tungkol sa ating sarili. Now, if I ask you about a close friend, I'm sure you could tell me about his character and illustrate with anecdotes and behaviors that is typical of him. You probably spend a lot of time looking at other people and forming an idea about who they are and what makes them tick. In fact, I'm sure that, like most people, you probably spend more time looking at the faces of others and thinking about their thoughts and actions than you do looking at your own reflections or ruminating on yourself. Therefore, how people form their self-concept is an interesting question for social psychologists. Here's a simple exercise to help you answer the question, who am I? You can ask and answer the questions in many ways, of course, but I'm interested in whatever comes to mind first. Take a piece of paper and write down, who am I? And leave the rest of the line. All right? Repeat for 10 lines, and I want you to go back and complete the started statement. When you are finished, look back over the list and categorize the statements using subjects such as the following. Physical attributes about yourself, such as your age, your appearance, and so forth. Psychological attributes, such as saying that you are a cheerful person or a pessimist. You can also categorize your answers into the social groups that you belong to, such as being a student or a supporter of a particular sports team or a particular politician. And you can also categorize your answers based on your likes and preferences, such as being a fan of early blues music or a history buff or a TikToker, whatever ticks you. Alright. So, the most important aspect of yourself, na pag-usapan nga natin kanina, is yourself. I'm not trying to be philosophical about this. ang pinaka-importanting bagay para sa atin ay ang ating sarili. You know who you are, your gender, whose feelings and memories you experience. Now, the elements of your self-concept, yung specific beliefs by which you define yourself, are your self-schemas. Alright? Schemas are mental templates by which we organize our worlds. Our self-schemas, our self-perceiving, our perceiving ourselves as athletic, overweight, smart, or whatever, powerfully affects how we perceive, remember, and evaluate other people and ourselves too. Consider if you think that your central idea about yourself is being athletic. If being athletic is one of your, this means that being athletic is one of your self-schema, then you will tend to notice other people's bodies and skills. You will quickly recall sports-related experiences, and you will welcome information that is consistent with your schema. Now, the schemas or the self-schemas that make up our self-concepts help us organize and retrieve our experiences. Now, our self-concept does not only include our self-schema about who we are currently, but also who we might become, our possible selves. All right? So, Hazel Marcos and her colleagues note that our possible selves include our visions of the self we dream of becoming, the rich self, the thin self, the famous self, the passionately loved and loving self. They also include the self that we fear becoming, the underemployed self, the self that failed your social psychology class, the unloved self, the academically failed self. Now, such possible selves motivate us with a vision of life that we long for. So, the self-concept has become a major social psychological focus because it helps organize our thinking and guide our social behaviors. But the question is, what determines our self-concepts? Studies of twins point to genetic influences on personality and self-concept, but social experiences also play an important part. Among these influences are number one, the roles that we play. As we enact a new role, let's say college student, parent, salesperson, politician, famous na artista, we initially feel self-conscious. Gradually, however, we begin as play acting in the theater of life is absorbed into our sense of self. For example, while playing our roles, we might support something we haven't really thought much about. Harry Roque was a staunch human rights lawyer before his time as the spokesperson of the president. In fact, noong 2015, nag-serve pa nga siya bilang lead attorney na nag-represent sa pamilya ni Jennifer Laude against Pemberton, who was charged of murdering Jennifer. Last year, however, in 2020, as the spokesperson of the president, he was happy to announce that Duterte granted Pemberton absolute pardon. The same man he advocated against in 2015 when he served as the lawyer of not the Pemberton family, of the Laude family. Number two, social comparisons. Okay? How do we decide if we are rich, smart, short? Actually, one way is through social comparison. Others around us help us to define the standards by which we define ourselves as rich or poor, smart or dumb, tall or short, famous or not, viral or not. Now, we compare ourselves with them and consider how we differ. Social comparisons explain why students tend to have a higher academic self-concept if they attend a high school with mostly average students, and how the self-concept can be threatened after graduation when a student who excelled in an average high school goes into an academically selective university. The big fish is no longer in a small pond. So, marami sa malaking bahagi ng buhay natin ay nagre-revolve around social comparisons. We feel handsome when others seems homely. Pagka, sabi nga nung joke, kung gusto mong magmukhang pogi, kumuha ka ng average-looking na mga kaibigan. We feel smart pagka tayo ay nasa gitna or kasama ng ibang tao, hindi masyadong matalino. We feel caring when others seems callous. Now, when we witness a peer's performance, we cannot resist implicitly comparing ourselves. We may therefore privately take some pleasure in a peer's failure, especially when it happens to someone we envy, and when we don't feel vulnerable, and when we don't feel vulnerable to such misfortunes ourselves. Social comparison can also diminish our satisfaction. When we experience an increase in affluence, status, or achievement, we compare upward. We raise the standards by which we evaluate our attainments. When climbing the ladder of success, we tend to look up, not down. We compare ourselves with others doing even better than us. When facing competition, we often protect our shaky self-concept by perceiving the competition as advantaged. For example, in the Philippine election, nobody loses fair and square, katulad nitong nasa picture na to. Yung losing candidates always blame those who won for cheating, even if it's obvious that they lost fair and square. Number 3 is that includes our success and failures. Self-concept is fed not only by our roles, our social identity, and our comparison, but also by our daily experiences. To undertake challenging yet realistic tasks and to succeed is to feel more competent. After mastering the physical skills needed to repel a sexual assault, women feel less vulnerable, less anxious, and more in control. After experiencing academic success, students believe they are better at school, which often stimulates them to work harder and achieve more. Kaya nga, when you were in grade school, your teachers actually give you higher grades than you deserve. This is in order for you to build onto that confidence, and that these early successes can be used for later challenges. To do one's best and achieve is to feel more confident and empowered. So, number 4 is how other people judge us. When people think well of us, it helps us to think well of ourselves too. Children whom others labeled as gifted, hardworking, or helpful tend to incorporate such ideas into their self-concepts and even their behaviors. If minority students, for example, feel threatened by negative stereotypes of their academic abilities, or if a woman feels threatened by low expectations for their math and science performance, or when a child is being bullied or being looked down upon by their parents, they may disidentify with those realms. Rather than fight such prejudgment, they may identify their interest elsewhere. Now, the looking glass self was how sociologist Charles Cooley in 1902 described our use of how we think other people perceive us as a mirror for perceiving ourselves. fellow sociologist George Herbert Mead refined this concept, noting that what matters for our self-concept is not how others actually see us, but the way we imagine they see us. People generally feel freer to praise than to criticize. They voice their compliment and restrain their gibes. We may therefore overestimate others' appraisal, inflating our self-image. So, how did you complete the I am statements that we did earlier? For some people, especially yung mga nanggaling sa industrialized Western cultures, individualism prevails. Identity for them is self-contained. Adolescence is a time of separating from parents, becoming self-reliant, and defining our personal independent selves. Yung identity natin as a unique individual with particular abilities, traits, values, and dreams remain fairly constant. Now, the psychology of Western cultures assume that your life will be enriched by believing in your power of personal control. Western literature, from the Iliad to the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, papunta sa Mean Girls or sa Perks of Being a Wallflower at kahit na sa Paper Town, this movie celebrates the self-reliant individual. Movie plots feature rugged heroes who buck the establishments. So, songs proclaim, I got to be me, declare that the greatest love of all is loving oneself, and state without irony that I believe the world should revolve around me. Okay? So, individualism flourishes when people experience affluence, mobility, urbanism, and mass media. More cultures native to, let's say, Asia, Africa, and Central and South America place a greater value on collectivism. They nurture what Shinobi Kitayama and Hazel Marcus call the interdependent self. In these cultures, people are more self-critical and have less need for positive regard. Malaysians, Indians, Filipinos, Japanese, and other traditional Kenyans, such as the Maasi, for example, are more likely than Australians, Americans, and the British to complete the I am statement with their group identities. When speaking, people use the language of collectivist countries, say, I less often than we. A person might say, went to the movies rather than I went to the movies. If you can, probably napapansin din ninyo, when politicians talk about themselves, a lot of them would say, ginawa natin, hindi sa, or we did this, we did that, hindi sa ginawa ko. The problem is when pigeonholing cultures as solely individualist or collectivist, this is a form of oversimplification. Because within any culture, individualism varies from person to person. There are individualist Chinese, individualist Filipinos, and even collectivist Americans. And most of us sometimes behave communally, sometimes individually. Individualism, collectivism also varies across a country's regions and even political views. In the US, Hawaiians and those living in the Deep South exhibit greater collectivism than do those in Mountain West and states such as Oregon and Montana. In the Philippines, similar din. Yung mga nakatira, let's say, sa provinces or sa southern Philippines, let's say sa Visayas and sa Mindanao, they tend to exhibit greater collectivism compared to those who live in and around NCR. So, liberals, on the other hand, tend to be economic collectivists for Americans and moral individualists. Despite individual and subcultural variations, researchers continue to regard individualism and collectivism as genuine cultural variables. Um, what's also interesting is that cultures can also change over time, and many seem to be growing more individualistic. China's young people, as well as that of Filipinos, have acquired the label the me generation. And new economic opportunities have challenged traditional collectivist ways in India. Chinese citizens under 25 are more likely than those over 25 to agree with individualistic statements such as make a name for yourself and live a life that suits your taste. In the US, younger generations report significantly more positive self-feelings than young people did in the 1960s and in the 70s. Even your name might show the shift towards individualism. American parents are now less likely to give their children common names and more likely to help them stand out with an unusual name. Probably you have noticed this in the Philippines too. While nearly 20% of boys born in 1990 receive one of the 10 most common names, only 9% receive such a common name by 2000s. Or rather by 2007. Today, you don't have to be the child of a celebrity to get a name as unique as Shiloh, Suri, Knox, Anisa, and Arya. In fact, you don't need to be the child of a celebrity or an affluent person to have your birthday celebrated to the max or your wedding celebrated to the max. Okay? These changes demonstrate something that goes deeper than a name. The interaction between individuals and society. Did the culture focus on uniqueness first and cause the parents' name choices? Or did the individual parent decide they wanted their children to be unique, thus creating the culture? The answer, though not yet fully understood, is probably both. Even self-esteem is actually influenced by culture. Self-esteem in collectivist culture correlates closely with what other thinks of me and my group. Self-concept is malleable, that is context-specific rather than stable, which is enduring across situations. For those in individualistic cultures, self-esteem is more personal and less relational. Threaten their personal identity, and they will feel angrier and gloomier than when someone threatens their collective identity. Unlike Japanese, who persist more on tasks when they are failing, wanting not to fall short of other people's expectations, people in individualistic countries persist more when succeeding because success elevates self-esteem. Western individualists like to make comparison with others that boost their self-esteem. Asian collectivists make comparison often upward with those doing better in ways that facilitate self-improvement. Sabi ni Socrates, know thyself. Sinundan ito ni Sigmund Freud nung sinabi niyang to thine own self be true. At finalo-upan ito ni William Shakespeare nung sinabi niya na this, above all, to thine own self be true. Alright? So, we certainly try, we readily form beliefs about ourselves, and we, especially in Western and Westernized cultures, don't hesitate to explain why we feel and act as we do. But how well do we really know ourselves? Yet, sometimes we think we know, but our inside information is wrong. That is the unavoidable conclusion of some fascinating research, which we are going to talk about now. Number one, with regards to explaining our behaviors. Now, I have to ask you this. Why did you choose psychology? Or why do you love that special someone? Sometimes, we know, sometimes we don't. asked why we have felt or acted as we have, we produce plausible explanations and answers. Yet when causes are subtle, our self-explanations are often wrong. We may dismiss factors that matter and inflate others that don't. People may misattribute their rainy day gloom to life's emptiness, and people routinely deny being influenced by the media or by other people, which they readily acknowledge affects others too. Also, though thought-provoking are studies in which people recorded their moods every day for 2 to 3 months. Uh, uh, Wilson and others in 1982 recorded factors that might affect their mood, the day of the week, the weather, the amount they slept, and so forth. At the end of each study, the people judged how much each factor had affected their moods. Even with their attention on their daily moods, there was little relationship between their perception of how well a factor predicted their mood and how well it really did. For example, yung mga tao na sa pakiramdam nila, they would experience more negative moods on Monday. In fact, their moods were no more negative on Mondays than on any other days. This raises a disconcerting question. How much insight do we really have on what makes us happy or unhappy? As Daniel Gilbert noted in Stumbling on Happiness noong 2007, not much. We are remarkably bad at predicting we are remarkably bad predictors of what will make us happy. Now, people also err when predicting their behaviors. Dating couples tend to predict their longevity or the longevity of their relationship through rose-colored glasses. Their friends and family often know better. This was reported by Tara McDonald and Michael Ross in 1997. Among University of Waterloo students, their roommates were better predictors of whether their romances would survive than they were. Medical residents weren't very good at predicting whether they would do well on a surgical skill exam, but their peers in the program predicted each other's performance with startling accuracy. So, if you're in love and want to know whether it will last, don't listen to your heart. Ask your roommate. And if you want to predict your routine daily behavior, how much time you will spend laughing on the phone, watching TV, playing Mobile Legends, for example, your close friends' estimate will likely prove at least as accurate as your own. One of the most common errors in behavior prediction is understanding how long it will take to complete a task. This is called planning fallacy. In the 2016 elections, President Duterte announced that in 3 to 6 months, the country will be free of corruption, drugs, and other things that ail our country. On average, students finish 3 weeks later than their most realistic estimate, and a week later than their worst case scenario estimate. However, friends and teachers were able to predict how late these papers would be, just as you should ask your friends how long your relationship is likely to survive. If you want to know when you will finish your term paper, ask your roommate or your mother. Should also do what Microsoft does. Managers automatically add 30% onto a software developer's estimate of completion. A 50% if the project involves a new operating system. So how can you improve your self-predictions, you may ask? The best way is to be more realistic about how long tasks took in the past. Apparently, people underestimate how long something will take because they remember previous tasks as taking less time. Or you can try predicting someone else's actions. A month before a presidential election, Nicholas Epley and David Dunning asked students to predict whether they would vote. Almost all, that is 90%, predicted they would vote, but only 69% did. Virtually identical to the 70% who predicted that a peer would vote. So if the student had only considered what their peers were likely to do, they would have predicted their own behavior very accurately. If Lao Tzu was right that he would he who knows others is learned, he who knows himself is enlightened, then most people, it seems, are more learned than enlightened. Now, many of life's big decisions involve predicting our future feelings. Would marrying this person lead you to a life of contentment? Would entering this profession make you make for satisfying work? Will buying iPhone 12 Pro Max will make you happier in the future, or would going on this vacation produce a happy experience? Or would the likelier result be divorce, job burnout, and holiday disappointment? Sometimes we know how we will feel if we fail that exam, win that big game, or soothe our tension with a half-hour jog. We know what exhilarating or we know what exhilarates us and what makes us anxious or bored. Other times, we may mispredict our responses. Studies of affective forecasting reveal that people have greater difficulty predicting the intensity and the duration of their future emotions. Our intuitive theory seems to be we want, we get, we are happy. If that's what's true, then this discussion would have fewer words. In reality, Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson noted that we often miswant people who imagine an idyllic desert island holiday with sun, surf, and sand may be disappointed when they discover how much they require daily structure, intellectual stimulation, or regular infusion of Pop-Tarts. In the same manner, we think that if our candidates or team win, we will be delighted for a long time. Mga dating DDS. But study after study reveal our vulnerability to impact bias. That is, overestimating the enduring impact of emotion-causing events. Faster than we expect, the emotional traces of such good tidings evaporate. Moreover, we are especially prone to impact bias after a negative event. When Gilbert and his colleague in 1998 asked assistant professors to predict their happiness a few years after receiving tenure or not, most believed that a favorable outcome was important for their job happiness. Losing my job would crush my life ambitions, they would say. It would be terrible, they would say. Yet, when surveyed several years after the event, those denied tenure were about as happy as those who received it. So, to a striking extent, then, our intuitions are often dead wrong about what has influenced us and what will we feel and do. But let's not overstate the case. When the causes of our behaviors are conspicuous and the correct explanation fits our intuition, our self-perception will be accurate. When the cause of behaviors are obvious to an observer, they are usually obvious to us as well. Now, we are unaware of much that goes in our minds. Perception and memory studies show that we are more aware of the results of our thinking than of its process. For example, If we experience the result of our mind's unconscious workings when we set a mental clock to record the passage of time or to awaken us at an appointed hour, when we somehow achieve a spontaneous creative insight after a problem has unconsciously incubated. Similarly, creative scientists and artists often cannot report the thought process that produced their insight, although they have superb knowledge of the result. That is because we have what is called a dual attitude system. Our automatic implicit attitude regarding someone or something often differ from our conscious controlled explicit attitude. From childhood, for example, pwedeng na-retain natin yung habitual automatic fear or dislike of people for whom we now consciously verbalize respect and appreciation. For example, many of us, when growing up, especially for those of you who were raised in traditional families, tend to be raised with implicit bias against members of the LGBT community. But as we are growing, as we grow older, we tend to refocus or we tend to retool our explicit attitudes. Although explicit attitudes may change with relative ease, implicit attitudes like old habits change more slowly. With repeated practice, however, new habitual attitudes can replace the old ones. Now, this has two practical implications. Okay? The first is for the psychological inquiry. Self-reports are often untrustworthy. Let me repeat that. Self-reports are often untrustworthy. Errors of self-understanding limit the scientific usefulness of subjective personal reports. The second implication is for our everyday lives. The sincerity with which people report and interpret their experiences is no guarantee that the validity of these reports. Personal testimonies are powerfully persuasive, but they may also be wrong. Keeping this potential for error in mind can help us feel less intimidated by others and be less gullible. Lastly, let's talk about self-esteem. Okay? Is self-esteem, our overall self-evaluation, the sum of all our self-schemas and possible selves? If we see ourselves as attractive, athletic, smart, and destined to be rich and loved, we will have high self-esteem. Yes, say Jennifer Crocker and Connie Wolf in 2001. When we feel good about the domains, looks, smarts, and whatever important to our self-esteem. Now, one person may have self-esteem that is highly contingent on doing well in school and being physically attractive, whereas other may have self-esteem that is contingent on being loved by God and adhering to moral standards. Thus, the first person will feel high self-esteem when made to feel smart and look good, and the second person when made to feel moral. But Jonathan Brown and Keith Dutton in 1994 argued that this bottom-up view of self-esteem is not the whole story. The causal arrow, they believe, also goes the other way around. People who value themselves in general way, those who have high self-esteem, are more likely to value their looks, abilities, and so forth. They are like new parents who, loving their infant, delight in the baby's fingers, toes, and hairs. The parents do not first evaluate their infant's fingers or toes and then decide how much to value the whole baby. Specific self-perceptions do have some influence, however. If you think you are good at math, you will be more likely to do well at math. Although general self-esteem does not predict academic performance very well, academic self-concept, whether you think you are good in school, does predict performance. Of course, each causes the other. Doing well at math makes you think you are good at math, which then motivates you to do even better. So if you want to encourage someone or yourself, it's better if you praise, rather if your praise is specific. For example, you are good at math instead of general. You're great. You are an awesome person. If your kind words reflect true ability and performance, you really improved. Like when you say you really improved on your last test, rather than unrealistic optimism like saying you can do anything. Feedback is best when it is true and specific, as piles and piles of research has shown this. Imagine you're getting your grade back for the first test in a psychological class. When you see your grade, you grown when you're hovering somewhere between 70 or 75, and but when you get an encouraging email with some review questions for the class, and this message, students who have high self-esteem not only get better grades, but they remain self-confident and assured. Bottom line, how your head and your self-esteem, bottom line, hold your head and your self-esteem high. Another group of students instead get a message about taking personal control of their performance or receive review questions only. So how would each group do in their final exam? To the surprise of the researchers, in one study, the students whose self-esteem was boosted did far the worst on the final. In fact, they failed. Poor students told to feel good about themselves, the researchers mused, may have thought, I'm already great, why study? Alright? So, now we also have to understand that self-esteem is contextual. There is a difference between feeling good when you feel smart and looking good versus if you feel good when you meet some moral standards, as we have mentioned earlier. Self-perception can have influence. For example, if you think you're good in math, you tend to do well in math. We want to avoid social rejections. Consequently, it motivates us to act with greater sensitivity to other people's expectations. Also, self-esteem can serve as motivation. Most people are extremely motivated to maintain their self-esteem. Bushman, in 2011, found that college students preferred a boost to their self-esteem to eating their favorite food, engaging in their favorite sexual activity, seeing a best friend, drinking alcohol, or even receiving a paycheck. When brothers have markedly different ability levels, for example, one is a greater athlete and the other is not, they report not getting along well. However, for those who tend to have similar ability level, they would report getting along pretty good. So, this means that social acceptance is equal to boost in self-esteem, and social rejection tend to result in lower self-esteem. So, let's also talk about the dark side of self-esteem. People with low self-esteem definitely have problems in life. They make less money, they abuse drugs, and are more likely to be depressed. And high self-esteem does have some benefit. It fosters initiative, resilience, and pleasant feelings. The problem is that teen males who engage in sexual activity at an inappropriately young age tend to have higher than average self-esteem. So do teen gang leaders, extreme ethnocentrists, terrorists, and even men in prison who commit violent crimes, they all tend to have high self-esteem. Above all, remember that Hitler had a very high self-esteem. So, in thinking about whether you want to have high self-esteem or the pros and cons of self-esteem, always remember that while there are some benefits to it, there are also some glaring problems to having very high self-esteem. Lastly, let's talk about self-esteem's conceited sister, narcissism. High self-esteem becomes especially problematic if it crosses over into narcissism, or having an inflated sense of self. Narcissists usually have high self-esteem, but they are missing the place or the piece about caring for others. The problem now here lies in the question, do narcissist people actually hate themselves deep inside? To test this, there was a research conducted, and it was found that people score high on measures of narcissistic personality traits tend to score high on measures of self-esteem too. So, to answer this question, it appears that narcissists don't have deep down self-hatred, but rather they love themselves so much that they tend to have inflated sense of self. So, there is one area where narcissists were only average, though still not insecure. Twenge in 2008 reported that today's young generation, or what she called Generation Me, expressed more narcissism. Narcissism, for her, correlates with materialism, or the desire to be famous, inflated expectations, fewer committed relationships, and more hooking ups, more gambling, and more cheating, all of which have also risen as narcissism has increased recently. So, as we have mentioned earlier, this ends part 1. In this video, we've talked about spotlight and illusion, self-concept, and why self-reports are unreliable. We've also talked about self-esteem, the importance of having high self-esteem, and the dark side of this. We've also talked about self-esteem ugly sister or cousin, that is narcissism, and how narcissism is increasing these days. Once again, thank you for watching, and my name is Dex Kamitan.